Welcome to the 9th episode of our new podcast, the CHC podcast, Congenital Heart Conversations. I am Anna Jaworski and a heart mom to an adult with a single ventricle heart. I'm so excited to be one of your co-hosts today, along with Hope Jaworski. Thanks for being with me today, Hope.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on one of your podcasts. As you said, I'm a single ventricle patient and a recipient of the Fontan procedure.
Times two.
Times two, yes, Fontan and revision. And while we're at it, I also had the MACE procedure.
Yes, you have quite a lot of experience as a congenital heart defect
That I
patient.
do.
Okay, we also have a producer today, Nicole Bilodeau, who many of you will remember from previous episodes. She is in the driver's seat. She's our producer, and she'll be back in the third segment to talk to us about what she's learned and to share her own experiences with us. But it's my pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Annie Ulchak. Many of my listeners may remember Annie from helping us with this podcast and also from being a guest on Heart to Heart with Anna. But for those people who don't know her, she was born in 1979 in Lima, Peru, with nomenclature hypoplastic left heart syndrome, or HLHS. She was adopted and brought to the United States by her adoptive parents. In the U.S., she has had 2 open heart surgeries. Her final surgery was the Fontan, and she has been battling complications from living with a single ventricle Fontan heart for years. Annie has been married and divorced twice and is currently in a committed relationship. Her second marriage was to another member of the CHD community.
Our second panelist is Ayrton Beatty. Ayrton is a bereaved sibling. Their mom has atrial fibrillation, and Ayrton himself was recently diagnosed with drug-induced long QT syndrome. Ayrton is also bisexual and non-binary.
Brian Ramsey is our third panelist, and Brian was born in 1986 and is also a single ventricle patient. He also was born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Unlike many people with HLHS, Brian did not have the typical 3-stage procedure, the Norwood, the bidirectional Glenn, and the Fontan. Instead, Brian has had 5 heart surgeries, with his last one at age 17 performed by the late great Dr. James Tweedle. He had the Norwood and a bidirectional Glenn and the Hemi-Fontan, but he was not a candidate for the Fontan. Like Annie, Brian has had to deal with complications from his single ventricle heart, but that didn't stop him from marrying a former coworker. He has been married for 3 years. I'd like to start the interview off by welcoming all the panelists. So welcome, Annie.
Thank you for having me. Hi, Anna.
I'm so glad you're on the program today, Annie, and I'm glad that you're on the program with us, Ayrton.
Thank you for having me again.
And this is the first time for Brian to be on the program, so welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks for letting me be on the program.
I'm so excited about this. I'm going to start with one question that I'll ask of all of you, and that is, how do you feel your heart condition has affected your experiences developing romantic relationships with other people? And Ayrton, I'm going to start with you.
Because I'm single at the moment, when I have tried meeting new people, I found it difficult because I have to explain to them why I'm not able to do things that are overly physical. And a lot of them don't fully understand why. They think I'm just making up excuses or I'm just not into them in certain ways. Because with me, I have to keep my pulse rate at a certain level. And I think I'm just using that as an excuse not to be physical with them.
Do you think it's complicated by the fact that you look so healthy?
Yeah, especially since I've lost a lot of weight. Oh, but you look fine. Okay, yeah, you walk with your crutches, but when you're lying down, you don't have to do anything else.
Yeah, I think one of the hard things about living with congenital heart defects is that it's an invisible illness.
Yeah, a lot of my problems are invisible, and the only thing they take seriously is my arthritis because they see me with my crutches, and that makes it more visible. But everything else is, yeah, you're just making that up as an excuse.
That would be so hard.
It can be frustrating at times, but to me, that just shows me they aren't the right person for me.
Annie, what about you? How do you feel your heart condition has affected your experiences of developing romantic relationships with people?
So for me, I've been very fortunate in being able to do a lot of things with my CHD heart. And so meeting people is the easiest thing because I'm just constantly outgoing. I can talk to a snail and it would talk back. And I'm able to weave in my heart condition because I don't really hide it. It's keeping people that can be the toughest part because everyone constantly sees me as this, oh, healthy person. They know I have a scar, blah, 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 or multiple scars, I should say. And yeah, I do have some issues in terms of how my body looks and what I wear. But it's when something happens medically that people tend to run away because for the first time ever, I'm not the strong, able person able to take care of myself. I'm now this person who needs somebody else to help me. And me asking for help is probably the hardest thing I can do because then I get it in my head that they don't want to help me. I feel bad for them that they have to help me. And it just becomes this thing where it's very difficult. And so even though the relationship has already developed and everything, it's sustaining it that can be the most difficult. Aside from my second marriage, everybody else has been heart healthy. But with my second
Mhm.
marriage, it was difficult at times too, because you had two patients and one who would constantly talk about his issues or his things. So I could be going through something in the hospital and the doctors could be asking questions. And next thing you know, it's all about him. And the doctors would stare at each other and then look at me and we'd have to wait for his long worded out stuff till they would come back to me and say, okay, how's the actual patient doing? So, like I said, it's the developing part is the easiest for me. It's sustaining that has not been easy at all.
Wow. And I was thinking that you would say that being married to somebody who has a condition himself would be easier because he would be able to relate to what you were going through. But it seems that was actually more complicated because he was used to being a patient. He wasn't used to being the one to give the care. He was used to receiving it.
Yeah, I have to agree there. You do get used to being a patient. And when you have to take care of someone else, whether it be for a heart condition or not, it's definitely a different role. But when you're doing it for someone with a heart condition, you try to relate. And sometimes by relating, you take away what that other person is experiencing. I know for myself, I do my hardest to just listen and see how
Mm.
they're feeling and asking questions and trying not to make it about me because it does take away that ability of being caring.
Brian, what about you? How do you feel your heart condition has affected your experiences of developing a romantic relationship with someone, with your wife?
Two parts. A lot I can relate to Annie on. The first part being is when I was younger, like her, I'm not afraid to discuss my heart condition or share it. So being a guy, when I was younger, I would overshare it, I feel, at the beginning, and I'd focus too much on it. And I feel like as a guy with a heart condition, once women found out about that for me, found out that was a part of my life, they seemed to get a little more worried because a guy in our society is supposed to be seen as larger, protective, and everything else. And I'm outgoing. I'm 130 pounds. I'm 5'8". So I'm not necessarily the biggest guy. So for me, that was more psychological. So I didn't date much in high school. I had only two girlfriends before my wife. But when I found her, what made it easy, a little like what Annie's talking about, is we both have health issues. I'm not going to go into hers because that's her own thing. But from that, we were able to bond on that. And when I do go with her for, I guess, her checkups and stuff, there's times when that I wanted to share a little bit, but the difference with me is I've also learned I'll share like a tiny bit and I'll say, though we're here for my wife, Tilly. If anytime we want to talk after, that's fine. But right now we are here for her. And we've really developed learning how to be a patient for one another and be an advocate for each other and making sure that we don't just put all the health on me when I'm in the hospital, but then we work on her health too. So the biggest thing I've learned is one, to get out of my own head and realized that it's okay as a male to have this condition, and my size and my ability to do physical work does not determine my worth in this relationship. And from that, my wife and I have been able to flourish and really enjoy each other the past 3 years for marriage and the 7 years we've known each other.
Wow, that's such a sweet answer. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Brian.
Thank you for allowing me to.
The second question is specifically for Miss Annie. You've been married and divorced twice, but you're now in a committed relationship. Is the gentleman you're involved with now part of the CHD community? And if not, can you explain how you've helped him to understand the chronic illness that you have to live with?
So the person I'm with right now, no, he is not part of the CHD community. He is heart healthy. When we actually first met, one of the things that we both loved about each other in the beginning and we connected on was that we're both very science oriented people. And not only in our careers, but also in our passions of studying and stuff.
Mm,
And it was actually quite fun talking to him for the first time because he starts talking about his work and what he does. And then I started talking about my congenital heart stuff. So it was like instant. Like I said, I am not shy about being a congenital heart patient at
yeah,
all. And we're just going into it. So in terms of having him understand my chronic illness, it's not been the easiest for me to talk about, even though I can talk about it on a surface level. When it comes to a deeper emotional level, it's a lot harder because a lot of it is still traumatic for me.
understandable.
Yeah, it gets me teary eyed at times, depending on what it is. A lot of it gets intertwined with some of the harder things. Like, for instance, I had a surgery that was supposed to be coming up, and instead, I ended up having to have a right breast biopsy and also a uterine surgery, which completely impacted my heart in ways that they didn't anticipate and had some atrial flutters
Uh,
too on top of it all this past year. For him to have to see me become this person that had to ask for help. And then, like I said, in my own head, I've already made a narrative where he doesn't want to help, or this is too much of a burden for him, or all these other things that I have to let go of and realize he has 3 children and I had to ask him for one night to stay. But I felt horrible that I had to ask him because this is now taking time away from his kids. And I didn't want to be that person. I just went on and
yeah,
on in my own head. And by the time I finally asked, it was a little inconvenient because it should have been asked from the get go, which I'm
right.
learning to do. But he sent a text to his kids. They completely understood and he was able to
That's
stay
good.
with me overnight. Yeah. So it's not easier at all. And having someone else understand that world of I'm not as strong physically and as strong emotionally at times, it's really tough. I'm trying to learn how to incorporate and understand. And therapy has been helping. But for us, there needs to be more therapy and there needs to be more so that I don't come off in my own head as needy, but I also don't come off in reality as shrill because I'm scared. I'm very scared. Everyone else has run away when the
Mm,
reality, or excuse my language, folks, shit has hit the fan. And
yeah,
now I have someone for the first time who wants to stay by my side. And I don't know how to deal with that.
it's new territory for you.
Yes, exactly. So having him understand is not as easy as one would hope. But we're getting there. It's going to take time, 3 years still, and we're getting there.
It sounds like you're doing all the right things to make it work. So
Thank you, Hope.
well done.
I
Well
appreciate that.
done.
Thank you.
So, Brian, can you tell us if you and Tilly have any plans to start a family?
That is a great question. And if you would have asked that about 6 years ago, the answer would have easily been yes, 5 or 6 years ago. The short answer is no, we decided not to have kids. And there's a few reasons why. There's her health complications, but I think more the larger story of what led me to the decision. So up till I was about 31 and 32, I was very healthy with my heart condition. Yes, I had 5 heart surgeries, though things were running on all cylinders. And I was working 40 hours a week and going to the gym probably 2 or 3 times a week. When COVID hit, I never got COVID. But during that time when I was home, somehow my left lung started failing me because of my last surgery. and I started having hemoptysis where I started coughing blood. Now, this is important because this led me to the decision of I started getting very ill, so much so when we got married in June 6th of 2020, 6 days later, I had a flight for life down to Prater Hospital in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We're not going to have kids because first things first is I don't want to end up leaving her with kids soon, or whether it's in 15 years or 20 or 5. The second thing is we have a lot of nieces and nephews. And then finally, we're finding out from the nieces and nephews we're getting the time we want with them. And we're also getting not just the time, but I guess all the joy and being able to hand back the kids at the end of the day to the parents and not have to put up with all the meltdowns. So that's the both worlds. I'm going to also paraphrase this also. Remember, as a congenital heart defect, each journey is different. So each choice is different. So just because we chose not to have kids does not mean it's not right for somebody else to choose to have kids.
That's very well said.
So that's our journey. We're sticking with it. And so far, we've loved it. And we have not regretted it since we made that decision. And just knowing that we're able to focus on each other and spoil our nieces and nephews is all we need to know. So thanks for asking a great question.
Thanks for such an awesome answer. And you're absolutely right. Every couple has the choice of whether or not they want to have children or not have children. And it seems here in the United States, anyway, you're seeing more and more couples who are choosing to be childless, but still get to enjoy those nieces and nephews or other children in their family. So I think you've really handled that in a great way. Okay, Hope.
I was going to say I have also settled into being an aunt for the various nieces and nephews, honorary nieces and nephews in my life, and I'm very satisfied with that. So I totally understand where Brian's coming from.
I thought you would.
Thank you, Hope, for saying that.
Of course.
The CHC Congenital Heart Conversations podcast is a presentation of Hearts Unite the Globe, or HUG, and is part of the HUG Podcast Network. HUG is a nonprofit organization devoted to providing resources to the congenital heart defect community to enrich the lives of our community members. For free CHD resources, please visit our website at congenitalheartdefects.com.
You are listening to the CHC podcast. If you have a question or comment that you would like addressed on our show, please send an email to Anna Jaworski at anna@thechcpodcast.com. That's anna@thechcpodcast.com. Now, back to the CHC podcast.
All right, so we have a question for Ayrton. As a single person, what stigma, if any, have you faced from potential romantic interests due to your congenital heart defect?
I think with a lot of people, it's a lack of understanding with it being invisible and also with it having the word drug induced. A lot of people think I've done it to myself by taking illegal substances. They don't realize it happened because I was taking prescribed medication for
Right.
other medical issues I had going on with me.
And that carries so much weight with it, that assumption, and then it's really hard to dissuade them from that.
Yeah. They just think I've been like some sort of like heroin or coke addict in the past and I deserve to have it.
Nobody deserves to have it, even if you do
Yeah.
make bad decisions.
Yeah.
Everyone makes mistakes. And you didn't even. So it's just a very ignorant assumption on their part.
Yeah. But then I tell them that obviously I lost my brother to an undiagnosed heart condition. And they're like, oh, so he obviously did the same thing then. I'm like, no, we don't know what actually
Yeah.
happened to them.
Ah,
Obviously, he had drugs in the system. I'm like, no, these autopsies showed there was nothing in the system that would have killed him. And they just look at me gone out. And it's just a whole lot of misunderstanding around the phrase drug induced. And they don't put the two together because prescription medications are also classed as drugs.
yeah. I worked in pharmacy for 8 years, so I understand the distinction, but most people would not.
Yeah. And it's also really uncommon complication to get as well.
I see. So, can
Yeah.
I ask, when you start dating somebody and you start getting to know one another, when do you typically bring that up and then start explaining it to them?
I don't bring it up right away. Obviously,
Mhm.
I tell them about my brother because I have a tattoo with his
Yeah.
face on it on my arm. But when we've been seeing each other for a while, or if we've been out walking and I get really hot and sweaty for no reason, I then have to
Mhm.
explain to them why I'm like that. And then
Yeah.
they just look at me gone out. The worst it's been is when I've actually clapped when we've been out walking
Oh.
and they've actually just gone up and left me on the ground.
Oh. That's awful.
So there's quite a lot of stigma around it, unfortunately.
That's very sad to hear about.
That makes me want to punch somebody. Ayrton
I
makes me want to
yeah.
find them and punch them. What is the matter with them? Who would just leave somebody collapsed on the ground? What an idiot. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry, Ayrton. You don't deserve that.
Because I carry some tablets on me that I have to take at set times, and they told me to take my medication, and they thought I'd taken something that made me stop on purpose. So again, it goes back to it being self-inflicted.
Well, people need to start asking questions instead of jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, I think this is part of the reason why I like coming on this podcast, because it's a way of educating people to help try and overcome some of the stigma there is about people who have invisible disabilities.
Yeah.
If we do take tablets and caps, it's not because we're taking something illegal. It's because we are actually taking something that we're meant to be taking that's right. It's just unfortunately for some of us, it had really nasty and unwelcome side effects that could damage our internal organs.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate
Yikes.
you being so candid about that, Ayrton, because you're right. It's through talking about it on podcasts like this that we can educate people. And then hopefully we will dispel some of those preconceived notions. So thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that with us. I appreciate that.
No problem.
So we're already up to the third question. And the final question that I'll be asking in this section is all of you are in different stages in your lives. Ayrton, you're still very young and just starting out. And Brian, you're settling into your role as a husband. And Annie, you have been around long enough to have learned some very valuable lessons. So for this question, I'd like to know what advice you have for somebody for finding someone who will value you along with your heart condition. And Brian, I'd like to start with you.
That's a great question, Anna. For me, first off, whether you have a congenital heart defect or you don't, anybody, first thing is number one, I'd say communication. Definitely. It took us a long time to figure out how we each communicate and then how we can communicate together. And we're still learning every single day on how to approach things. I know that I like to just get right to it when the idea pops in my head, where she's a person who likes to take time. I've learned to slow down on presenting an idea, and she's learned to speed up and get the point across right away.
I love that. So you've tried to meet in the middle.
Yeah. The second thing is our decisions. Even though we don't have kids, we take the advice. She's Dr. Phil. We take his advice, which is we use it for our families and just in general. They say you don't let your kids make the parenting decision. So we use that. We make sure, even though we're not parents yet, we're making the decision together and we don't let outside influences affect our decision on what we want for our marriage. And then the third thing can be something definitely I think all CHDers can do. And it took me the longest to learn is, and Annie alluded it to already, though I get it from my side of where just because I'm in the hospital and I'm unwell doesn't mean that my wife isn't also hurting or that she's not also struggling with something else that may be even unrelated to it. So there's times even when I get home after the hospital, I got to remember and check in with her and go, "Hun, I'm getting better. Though, how is your health right now? Have we done the check-in? Have we followed up with your doctors? How are you doing?" In order for my health to be good also, she's got to be. In order for me to get better, the stress goes down when I know she's taken care of, and that's taken a long time for me to realize. Just because something's happened to me doesn't mean there's not something happening to her. And I've got to take time out of myself and step into her world and make sure she's doing well. So those are my 3 points of advice on making
Those are
a
great.
relationship.
Yeah. And finding somebody to value you. They have to value you if they're willing to meet you in the middle and not let those outside influences
Yeah.
ruin your marriage. That's a tough one for a lot of us, especially when you have large extended families.
And I'd say the third one, me stepping out of my heart condition and also valuing her enough to realize even though I'm getting better, but she may be struggling on something else. And so value for me goes both ways. And I feel at first it was she valued my health more than I valued hers because I was so far into mine.
Mhm.
And I was the one who needed to learn to stop talking and stop rambling and let her share her ideas and how her health was going.
I love that. That's really sweet. And it shows a great level of maturity and compassion for each other. That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Ayrton, what advice do you have for finding someone who will value you along with your heart condition?
For me, it's just a case of learning or finding someone who's willing to learn to understand what my condition is about and not just walk away from me when I'm lying on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Yeah, that person clearly was not for you.
Doesn't sound like
Yeah,
that person was for anyone, to be honest.
yeah, no,
agree
that
with you.
person definitely wasn't for anyone.
But I like what you said, somebody who's willing to take the time to really understand your condition and
Yeah.
not run away, which Annie alluded to previously when she was saying that that's one of her fears was that once somebody really came to understand the extent of her condition, that they would just run away. So that seems like solid advice to me.
Yeah, I'm a lot like Annie. I don't ask for help either unless I am, well, lying on the ground pretty much. That is the only time I will ask for help. And if you aren't willing to help me when I'm lying on the ground, then yeah, you can just keep on walking as far away from me as possible
Right.
because you will never understand. You won't even want to learn to understand my illness.
I agree. Annie, what about you, sweetie? What advice do you have for finding someone who will value you along with your heart condition?
Well, I have to say that before you can find someone else to value you, you have to learn how to value yourself first. Like I said, it's still difficult for me that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, that not being okay is okay, and admitting it and looking at yourself, whether it be emotionally, spiritually, or physically, when you look at yourself in scars and you see all the things that you feel in your own mind are wrong, that they aren't wrong. They're you. They're right. I've had people over the years that I now finally am taking those words of thought where if you weren't alive, you wouldn't have those scars. So to have those scars means you have that opportunity to be alive. Once you've learned to at least value those smaller pieces, though they may seem smaller for a lot of people, I know for myself they're really huge. And I still struggle with it. I'm not saying that I've come to this epiphany and I'm this, perfect person all of a sudden. But those little pieces every day are something I have to think about, something I have to remember about. And once you're able to do that, finding someone who wants to stick around for the long run, who wants to listen to what you have to say when it comes to your condition, it makes it a little bit easier because even if at times they don't truly understand it or want to understand it at that moment, you know that they're there already And it's just going to take some time and learning and teaching them about the world you've had to learn all your life. And so, as Brian said, communication is huge. I can communicate, but actually sitting down and being deeply communicative, that can be a little bit more difficult because you're afraid. You're afraid they're going to laugh. You're afraid they're going to just be silent and not say anything. But with that communication has to also come compassion from both sides. Compassion that it's going to take them a while to get there and understand you as a patient. But then that person also has to be compassionate when you're asking for help. You're asking them to be understanding or soothing. Even if it's not part of them, they need to listen and realize that just those little key pieces are what's going to make you feel stronger and a lot better. So I think learning to love yourself and then also learning the art of communication and having that compassion on both ends is what's key on being able to hopefully have a sustainable relationship.
I love it. That is all excellent advice. Wow. Well, I think we'll conclude this segment. Hope, do you want to take us out?
When we come back, it will be time to speak with our producer, Nicole Bilodeau, about her feedback on this episode.
Awesome.
Anna Jaworski has written several books to empower the congenital heart defect, or CHD community. These books can be found at Amazon.com or at her website, www.babyheartspress.com. Her bestseller is The Heart of a Mother, an anthology of stories written by women for women in the CHD community. Anna's other books, My Brother Needs an Operation, The Heart of a Father, and Hypoplastic Left Heart Syndrome, a handbook for parents, will help you understand that you are not alone. Visit babyheartspress.com to find out more.
This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions expressed in the podcast are not those of Hearts Unite the Globe, but of the hosts and guests, and are intended to spark discussion about issues pertaining to congenital heart disease or bereavement. Welcome back. Now it's time for all of us to visit with one another, and especially for us to bring Nicole Bilodeau out from behind the producer seat and into the studio with us and let her share her feelings and her stories with us as well. So thanks for being our producer today, Nicole.
Thank you, Anna, for having me. I enjoy being behind the scenes, like the Wizard of Oz back here.
I know, right? And you do a good job, so it's a lot of fun. Nicole was born with a congenital heart condition, but didn't discover it until she was in her 40s. I think that puts you in a very unique position as far as relationships are concerned. Wouldn't you say, Nicole?
Oh, absolutely. I've gone my entire life almost to this point not knowing that I had a heart condition, so it was never anything that I've ever had to discuss with anybody before. And now I'm only 11 months post-op, so I'm still trying to navigate wanting to date and then trying to figure out when I'm supposed to tell a potential partner about what is going on.
So what did you think of this episode, Nicole?
I was very happy to hear about other individuals also choosing to be childless and rocking the aunt or uncle reign.
Yes.
I have several nieces and nephews. I have a great nephew and I have another great nephew on the way later on this year. And I very much enjoy the fact that we can hang out, we can do things, especially I have a niece and nephew who are twins who are now 30. So my niece and I are pretty close and I enjoy doing stuff with her. But growing up, I enjoyed going and doing all the fun kid things. And then at the end of the day, I got to return them back to their parents.
It's almost as good as being a grandparent, except you're younger, so you can appreciate it with more energy than you could do as a grandparent.
It's so true. The niece that is currently pregnant, she's pregnant with her first. And my sister, her mother, will tell you that she is my child. My sister may have given birth to her, but this poor kid is 100% me. And I had to apologize to her husband for some of her bad habits. But I have joked that this is as close to a grandchild as I'm ever going to get.
Aw, That's so precious. I absolutely love that. Hope, what did you think about the program?
It was very enlightening. I don't have a whole lot of experience with dating. Last time I actually seriously dated a girl was about 10 years ago. So I have been very, let's say, unaware of the complications that can arise.
You seem so comfortable in the many friendships, and you have a lot of very deep and lasting friendships, like with Philip and Max, people you have known practically your entire life.
Yes,
And I see you developing long term relationships that aren't of an intimate nature.
right.
And you seem very comfortable with that. And I'm curious how you feel as far as disclosing information about your heart condition to those friends.
That's not very intimidating. For one thing, my very old friendships, like you said, Max and Philip, and some others, they've known me since I was so young. We've all known about it for a long time. Really, I think you told their parents, and it never seriously came up in conversation between me and them. Their parents knew because when I would go over for sleepovers, they had to make sure I took my meds. But it rarely ever came up in conversation with me and my friends when we were young.
Right.
So I don't know that
Yeah.
it had a whole lot of impact on us.
Right.
And then, of course, it's there. We all know. We don't ever feel the need to bring it up. More recently, at work, I would wear a scrub top and you could see the top of my scar over it. And so every now and then people would ask, and we all worked in a group down together in the inpatient pharmacy. So I would have this discussion and other people would overhear, and it just came out naturally. But because we all worked in the medical field, there was a certain understanding between us all. And it was not, again, it was not scary to tell them because there's that kind of knowledge of, oh, yes, you have this condition, you have to take meds for it, you have to see the doctors more often, but there's a lot of understanding of those situations. So I bypassed a lot of stigma that most people would have to face when explaining themselves.
That makes sense. This show was really interesting for me to hear because I'm the oldest person here by far. I've been married longer than some of you have been alive. I just celebrated my 37th wedding anniversary. And I really could relate to a lot of the things that Annie and Brian were saying about the importance of communication, but also the importance of loving yourself first before you can love somebody else deeply. We had problems early on in our marriage when my husband wasn't happy with himself, and that definitely affected our relationship. And Annie, I'm so glad you brought up going to counseling and how therapy can help because I don't think Frank and I would still be married if we hadn't had successful therapy to help us work through a lot of complicating factors, such as my husband was an adult child of an alcoholic. And that definitely can wreak havoc with a relationship as well.
Yeah, that is an illness as well, too. So I can completely understand that in the sense of having things from your past really come forward, especially when you have a big event like a marriage and different things, too.
And then you bring children into the mix, and that complicates everything further. The communication aspect that you and Brian talked about is critical. If you don't have good communication, I don't see how you can have a good marriage. And I am one of the few people that I know who, the longer I'm married to Frank, the more I fall in love with him. And I just feel so blessed that it's like that because I've known lots of other people who, once they're married for a certain period of time, it's like the magic wears off. And I think that's really sad. For Frank, I feel like I keep rediscovering other magical things about him.
And if I can add, we've done therapy too. And going to therapy, relationship therapy or counseling, doesn't
Mhm.
mean necessarily there's something wrong in the marriage or anything that you need to work on. but it's a great way to bring in a third perspective, outside party. And that's what taught how to and I learned to communicate was she saw somebody. She asked me to come and meet them. I met them. Then that got us to get our own relationship counselor. And that person was able to show us how we communicate to each other by giving us some third perspective. So even when the marriage is going well, doing counseling can still help and make it even that much better because you're bringing in a professional who works on this stuff every day and can see from a third party how you're communicating, even though you may not see it. So thank you,
I
Anna,
agree.
for bringing up that going to counseling, individual or couples counseling, is excellent in any relationship. And I'm all for that. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I agree 100%. Another thing that Frank and I do that I think has really strengthened our marriage, but I never would have guessed this, is we both joined Toastmasters. And I've been a member of Toastmasters now for 22 years. And for those of you who don't know what Toastmasters is, it's an international organization designed to help people become better communicators. That's the whole purpose. And through that, you also become a better leader. And it's that communication on a weekly basis. We're in meetings with other people working on our communication skills. And part of that is active listening, which you talked about, Brian, and which you also mentioned, Annie. And Ayrton, we need to get some people active listening with you and with Hope so that you all, and with Nicole, really all of us need to have people who are actively listening, who care about what's important to us. And that's how we make a valuable partner. We have to do it ourselves. We have to be the active listeners, but also to have somebody else who's willing to listen to us.
I agree. As my therapist had said, listen to hear, don't listen to respond, which for me is probably one of the hardest things I've had to do because I'm always ready to want to respond. And so actually having to hear the person and just sit back and not make it about me, it's not always the easiest. And Brian, thank you for that because regarding the couples counseling, relationships counseling, and you too, Anna, because I know that's something Dave and I, we do have some different communication styles that we see from time to time that aren't always working in our favor. And so that's something that now that we've come back from vacation, we really want to invest in and see if it would make us a stronger couple or make us realize maybe this isn't the right thing for either of us, which is not a bad thing either.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I have a plaque in my house somewhere that I had given my husband on our wedding day that talks about you don't marry the right person, you become the right person. And I'm not quoting that verbatim, but I think that you shouldn't be looking for the right person. You look to be the right person in a relationship, and relationships evolve. I think it's rare to find somebody that's a perfect fit today who will also be the perfect fit 10 years from now. That's not realistic. People grow and change. The challenge is to grow and change together and loving one another. And it is a huge challenge, especially in today's day and age where there are so many distractors and so many outside influences. I really admired what Brian said about he and his wife making this pact not to let outside influences destroy their marriage. It's very easy for politics and religion and family to come in between you and your loved one.
I got my parents' plaque for the 50th wedding anniversary that said, for 50 years of marriage, remember that the first 47 years are the hardest.
No.
That's awesome.
Oh my goodness. I love your sense of humor, Ayrton. Hope, why don't you take us to the next question?
Sure. Okay. So, what surprised you most, Nicole, about the episode today?
I don't know that there were any surprises other than the fact that despite having a CHD, the relationship issues are the relationship issues that everybody faces, even when you don't have congenital heart defect, or in my experience, not knowing that you had one to begin with, although I'm currently single, I have been in several committed relationships over the course of my life. So I've had communication style issues and different conversations about potentially taking things to the next level or ultimately deciding that this isn't the right relationship for the two of us, and being okay with it and walking away as adults and saying, hey, best of luck and no hard feelings. And maybe you stay connected on social media so that you can still see the good things that are happening in that person's life. You wish them well. Hey, congratulations, you got a new job, what have you. So I don't know, that was a surprise, but it was nice to see or hear.
Yeah, I've heard that when you have problems or very good things, when you go through wonderful things like getting your dream job or winning the lottery, or when you go through tragedies or hardships, that those things don't change who you are, they just amplify what already exists about you. So through that lens, it makes sense that having a heart condition doesn't really add a whole lot of new challenges. It adds one or two, but it mostly seems like the problem is just amplifying the existing problems that are in every relationship, like you said.
I think what surprised me most is what always surprises me with the CHC podcast, and that is how candid people can be and how trusting they are in this micro environment.
Mm.
I love how we can come together on this podcast with a small group of friends and make new friends instantly almost. Brian, we're just getting to know you, and yet you made yourself vulnerable and shared very important information with us. And I appreciate that so much because everybody comes together on this podcast to share with the hope and the intent to help others in the CHD community. So I think that's one of my favorite things about this podcast, but it continues to surprise me how candid and how really raw some of the stories are, and that people are willing to share these aspects of their lives with others to help others. It's so altruistic.
Well, you make a very safe environment for people.
Thank you.
I was just going to say that, Hope. It's a very
Oh,
welcoming environment. So thank you, Anna. And thank you,
uh,
Hope.
thank you, Brian. Thank you, Hope, for saying that. And I love having Annie and Nicole and Airton really were like the core group for the CHC podcast. I think the three of you have been with me on almost every podcast. So I think that speaks highly. And Hope, this is your second or third times. Is there anything that really surprised any of our panelists about this program? I'm really curious.
Yes, one thing I was surprised was, I guess as I am getting older, my heart conditioning notes were quite different. Experiences seem to be quite similar as far as going through the motions of being an advocate for yourself and getting the right help health wise. So it was great hearing the other stories. And though we're all different, that there are some similarities. And I found myself going, not only that's a great point, but wow, do I remember that? Oh my gosh, that sounds like something that just happened a year or 2 years and a half ago, or oh, that person has that little tendency. How do they handle that? And can I learn something from that person? So though I'm 36 currently right now, I'm just re-entering the community again of CHD in the past year and a half, and how much I'm learning that though we're all different, there are similarities, and it's nice knowing that though I may be in a different boat, we're all still traveling the same river. So thank you for bringing me on.
I love that. That brings me to the last question, which is what the biggest takeaway is. And I'd like to know that from everybody. So I'm going to start with you, Brian. What was your biggest takeaway from this episode?
As I said before, as I get older and as I'm part of the CHD community, realizing that even though we all have differences in our anatomies and how we're raised and everything else, that there's still similarities between us and the events that we go through in life. And it's nice knowing that even though I may be in my own different boat, we're all traveling the same river. and we do have some of the same tendencies and same life stories to share. So it was great hearing everybody's perspective and learning more about the community as I re-enter it. It's been a long time since I've been a part of checking out posts, reading up, and talking to other people with CHD. So thank you for having me today once again, Anna.
Thanks, Brian. That's a great takeaway. Ayrton, what was your biggest takeaway from this episode?
It was finding out that people, unfortunately, in the CHD community also use the condition as a coach when their partner's unwell. I had a similar experience with an ex with his mental health problems when I was unwell with mine. I think it's just sad that people feel like they have to do that to try and get attention back on themselves.
Interesting. Nicole, what was your biggest takeaway from this episode?
I think it was the reminder that before you can love anybody else, you have to love yourself first. I think that's a concept I've always struggled with, and now is probably more so.
Do you find it harder to love yourself now that you have this condition?
Yeah, because definitely my condition has the potential to be hereditary, but to the best of our knowledge, I'm the magic unicorn that was the one that ended up with it. Nobody else has it. So I have been struggling a lot with why me. And then I've had some not so great experiences meeting people since my surgery.
I'm glad that you were on the program, and thank you for being the producer again, Nicole.
Thank you.
Annie, what has been your biggest takeaway from this episode?
Simple things. The couples counseling, for one, learning how to communicate with your styles, with your other person. And as Nicole said, learning to love yourself first, which is very difficult. All in all, what we're realizing here is whether you have a congenital heart condition or not, we still have to learn to love ourselves. We still have to fight battles that we're all fighting battles with constantly, whether it be with ourselves or with other people, or trying to fight for that relationship, trying to fight for that open communication, and trying to just fight to stay alive. It's always constantly there. And I think at times it's not always in the forefront, but when it is, that's how we realize whether this relationship we're in is right for us or not.
I love that. And you're always so open, Annie. I've had a lot of people tell me how much they love and value you because you value everybody and you are kind to everybody.
I can be kinder. Trust me. You don't live with me. I think Dave could tell you a few stories.
You're so funny, Annie. Oh, I love you so much. Okay, Hope, you're the last one, and I'd like to know what your biggest takeaway was from this episode.
I'd say my biggest takeaway is I have a long way to go. I haven't even begun dating, and I had best be prepared when I do to have a long journey ahead of me with that. But it'll be worth it when I do.
All wise words. Everybody here was just so amazing. I enjoyed the conversations so much. So, Hope, I'm going to let you take us out.
Thank you for joining us today on the CHC podcast. We hope you'll join us next month for a town hall meeting where we will be talking about cardiac transplantation. Until then, I'm Hope Jaworski.
And I'm Anna Jaworski. Have a great day and keep those congenital heart conversations going on Facebook and Instagram.
Thank you for joining us. The CHC podcast can be heard monthly wherever you get your podcasts. Visit us on Facebook or Instagram to continue the conversations. Join the Hearts Unite the Globe Patreon group and become part of our town hall meetings. It's simple. Just visit www.heartsunitetheglobe.org and select the tab that says Donate to Hug with Patreon. Then you too can be part of the conversation.